You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
From kitchen chaos to well-oiled machines, get ready for newfangled technology and old-school know-how. Stories and a good bit of fun. I'm Simon, and this is Culinary Mechanic. Joining me today is Josh Donald of Bernal Cutlery down in San Francisco, California. Josh, welcome to Culinary Mechanic.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm stoked because I'm a chef and I love my knives. So getting to talk to somebody who's in the knife business, does the thing, I'm down. So without too much pomp and circumstance, let's say kind of give us the Batman Begins on you and Bernal Cutlery.
Well, it would officially be a little over 20 years ago when I had been laid off from a job. It was a new job. I was going to be managing a decorative bronze hardware warehouse, and I was going to be doing the patinas on the bronze and arranging for like warehousing stuff and facilitating sales, I think, and something like that. I had previously to that worked as a in a bronze foundry casting bronze, maybe like 8 years before that. So kind of a little bit of a like job change for me. The job sounded great. First day, the guy that I interviewed with left, and it just the bell was tolling, and it didn't work out, and they let me go. It was the only time I've ever been fired from a job, and I was kind of stoked because it was right when my first son was about 9 months old, and my wife was starting to get work doing freelance photo assisting styling on photo shoots, and so that work was really unpredictable. Some weeks she would have like full work, and then other times it would be like 5 weeks would go by and there would be nothing. Checks were really irregular. Sometimes she'd get paid a couple weeks after she worked, other times it would take months. And so I was sharpening our kitchen knives and at our kitchen table, and we were talking about what I could do from home, and I thought, I like sharpening, so let's go, try this. And so we put up some flyers in the neighborhood, and I would go around with the baby stroller and pick up people's knives from their houses in Bernal Heights. Shortly after that, I started working through a butcher shop that was in the neighborhood, and I would go there a couple times a week and pick up and drop off knives. I started selling vintage and antique knives shortly after I started the sharpening service. And I had a flea market that was close to my house in Bernal Heights in San Francisco at that time. And so I'd go down there Sunday mornings, and a couple visits in, I came down there at like 10 a.m. There were no knives. And my guy down there said, you got to get here early if you want to get the good stuff. And so I made a note of that. I got there at like 5 a.m. Every Sunday morning, and it would be me and the flashlight throwing elbows with the other old men down there. I wasn't an old man yet, but trying to get into my box. And I got first crack at a box of old knives, and there would be, there was a lot of junk, but there was also some great stuff in there. And I could buy, stainless knives for $5 and carbon steel for 10. And so I bought a lot of knives and sold knives on eBay and through the butcher shop and walking around restaurants, and just got a chance to start learning about old knives that way, and got a chance to handle a ton of them. A lot of knives that I bought for, $5 or $10 were only worth $5 or $10, and they were just kind of nothing special. And I got to, learn that way. And then a lot of things that I found in there were like these really amazing, mostly American and European knives. Every now and then a Japanese knife would pop up in there, but you don't find them a whole lot in the States. Honestly, right. People weren't really using them, like 50 years ago or whatever, when the people that picked up those things would have bought their stuff. And there were some things from the 19th century in there, some real heirloom stuff. Every now and then there would be knives that were made in San Francisco in the 19th century that I'd find down there. Very
Cool.
infrequently. Those are the first things that I started keeping because I thought they were really fascinating, really distinctive, just different than everything else. And they didn't fetch what I thought they should. And so I started keeping those, and I've been able to make a little collection of those. But yeah, so I ran Bernal Cutlery like that for 5 years from home. We moved a couple different times. This is in the recession and stuff. So this was going into like being a little bit leaner times in ways for people, but I was still building this business. My wife Kelly was still doing the photo styling that was starting to take off, but at around 2010, a lot of that work was being replaced by just straight digital stuff, that not just digital photography, but like the photo shoots being done more digitally. So the work was starting to dry up a little bit. And
Interesting.
we had the offer of getting a brick and mortar spot in the neighborhood. There was a landlord that was a landlord of some friends of ours that was had just purchased a commercial building on Cortlandt Avenue in Bernal Heights, and she was turning it into a shared workspace. The idea with it was that it would be a first time brick and mortar shop for culinary related businesses. So all the other
Yeah.
businesses that I was joining that little um, operation with were selling food, but I was selling knives and doing sharpening. And it was just 1,000 square foot space. I had like little tiny, what was it? It was like under 200 square feet. It was this, or it was no, it was 94 square feet, I think. Little
Nice.
tiny space. It was like just enough room for me to work in, and have some knives on the wall. And that was my first brick and mortar. And I had my own lease. It was very, honestly, a really generous kind of idea from the ladies that put that together. They really wanted to help people out that were getting started and knew that there were a lot of barriers with just the costs of
Right.
getting a brick and mortar spot, but they felt that there was a lot of viable businesses that could benefit from having like a shared space that they could work with. There was a kitchen in the back that was a up to health codes for like doing prep work. I didn't need that, but for everybody else that helped them get started. So I was there for 3 years. We kind of outgrew that space, and then we moved to outside of Bernal Heights to the Mission. It's a neighboring neighborhood here in San Francisco, and we got our first standalone shop there at Guerrero Street, and that was a sweet little spot for us for a number of years. We were there till from 2013 to 19. And then in 2019, again, we felt like we had outgrown the space, and the building also needed a seismic upgrade. So we would have needed to have left the building for some construction to have happened, and that was a little bit of a sword of Damocles for us. The landlord at that space was great. He was a really sweet guy, and it was really easy to work with. But this was something that was going to interrupt our operations long enough to, potentially put us out of business. At that point, we really, couldn't just stop for 3 months. So found another spot around the corner, a bigger spot, and we've been there since 2019. And yeah, so I guess that's the kind of skeleton of our history.
I
There's
love it, man.
tons more, to fill in.
Totally. Um, God, I love this. I love the idea of just finding the old knives, right? Like that whole piece is just, um, and it's got some romantic notion to it for me for sure. Like I remember when like my grandfather was an old Ukrainian man, and he could cook like three things, but he had one knife that was like his baby,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember my dad, it got passed to my dad, and so I don't know, one of my cousins has it now, I think, but I always remember that as being like the sharpest thing I'd ever seen.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Just and then to think about carbon knives versus the stainless steel. Like I spent 30 years, 30 plus years in the industry, and it's like everything's stainless steel. You just don't see too many people playing with carbon. And not too long ago, I got myself a Japanese knife that is carbon steel, and I just can't stop using that thing.
It's
It
a
just makes me so happy, man.
Yeah, stainless steel has definitely evolved a lot. In the last, like, I mean, certainly in the last 50 years, and definitely in the last 20, it's gotten a lot better in many applications. But yeah, carbon is its own thing. It's kind of hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You just get it. I feel like you can have a lot less blade and get more done somehow.
Yeah,
But
you can get a lot of bite in there. What were some of the dishes that your grandfather would make?
so my grandfather did bakes. I'm from the East Coast, so Massachusetts.
Okay.
So not really Ukrainian food so much.
Uh-huh.
But though there were pierogies pretty much every other week
Okay.
that I would be around the house. But his things were clam chowder, baked stuffed lobster, and like pot roast, and that was about it.
Hell
Like
yeah.
that's what he did.
Uh-huh.
Um, he married a Polish lady, so the pierogies were the cheese style rather than the potato style.
Uh-huh.
So that was pretty dope to have. Um, but like I say, like his clam chowder to this day is like the gold standard. It was gluten free of all damn things, right? It was thickened by the potato starch, and
Mm.
so that was always it's definitely the benchmark for me on clam chowder. So, um, got any favorite knives? I like this is a fun question, but it also can be silly, so it's worth asking.
Oh man, it's tough. It's like it would be like if you asked me which of my kids was my favorite, I would tell you like, no, I don't have favorites. And then but there would be one thing like, oh yeah, but this guy, like, you got to hear the story, or there would be somebody that would be like, one of them would definitely be kind of like maybe in my best graces at the time, right? Like, so that's kind of in a way how I feel about like with knives. But it might depend on like what job I'm doing. Um,
Right.
there'll be some knives where I'm like, if I'm gonna be uh you know like cutting a loaf of bread, I've got like my old 12-inch Sabatier chef's knife that, like, for a crusty loaf of bread, that's my favorite knife. If I'm going to be making like sauerkraut, then I definitely like a big chef's knife. I like something that's got some punch to it, and I've got some old French 12-inch chef's knives that are kind of my favorites for that kind of work. For like more day-to-day stuff, like small vegetable work, then I've got some Japanese knives that are really kind of my go-to for that kind of stuff. I have there's a I've got my favorite mango knife, which is a uh Konosuke SLD steel petty knife that's gotten sharpened down and thinned out a lot. It's maybe like it's lost about a quarter of its length and width, but I've reground it several
Okay.
times, and that one is my favorite mango knife. Um, but I'll also have like knives that I'm testing for the shop. So we'll kind of have a cycle of like like guest stars in my in my kitchen at home. That's kind of the best way for me. Excuse me. That's the best way for me to really get a feel for what a knife is like, is to use it for a while and not just use it when it's brand new and has a screaming sharp edge on it, but like get a chance to use it long enough that it gets dull, see what it's like to resharpen. I'll do that a couple times so that I can try some different edges on it, try it with a bunch of different jobs, and then just kind of settle into the regular style of cooking that I do. There's, um, you know, I'm not like insanely ambitious like with my cooking at home, but I do get a feel for how things work after I've done kind of the same thing with it for a bunch of times and a bunch of different
Nice.
finishes. So for a lot, not everything that we saw in the shop, but a good portion of it, I try and do that with. So that really,
That's awesome.
yeah,
I
that's
don't hate that idea.
it's fun.
Yeah.
Every now and then I'll get something that I'm not wild about, and that's like, and then, passed off to somebody else on my crew, and maybe they find something else redeeming about it. Or, sometimes that's how we call stuff too. If we're like, this is like, this knife is, it's not hitting it. But it's also very, for in terms of selecting knives for the shop, we do have different users in mind. So I don't expect everybody to be, real careful with their knives. Like sometimes I'll do some like kind of dumb things with a knife. Like while we don't really source things to be abused, we don't want people like hacking at, turkey thigh bones with a Japanese chef's knife. Sometimes I'll hit like chicken bones in a way that aren't really the plan to see what happens, and that can help me figure out, the toughness of certain things as well.
Let's pause for a second. If you're serious about building a kitchen that leads from the top, runs on systems, and actually feels good to work in, make sure you're following Culinary Mechanic. This show is all about helping you lead better, scale smarter, and stop white knuckling your business. And if you're ready to dig in deeper, you'll find a link in the show notes to connect with me directly. Totally. I think as I was coming up as a sous chef, probably about the same time that you were starting to sharpen knives, um, I sort of fell in love with um, just the non-pointy knives of the world, right? Like the Santokus and some of the Mac knives. And I found that there was always I always kind of had one knife that I would take on the line, and it never failed. It was always something that like had either had its point knocked off,
Mm-hmm.
or had been just worked over the years, so it kind of was a little less pointy and would be durable, because you
Mm-hmm.
wanted something on the line that was good, it was sharp, but like kind of say stupid shit happens, so I always think of like the line knife, the knife that you're just gonna beat to absolute hell, and that it's got to be good, but it doesn't need to be, it's not like your fine knife. You just need to be able to cut things and move around with
Mm-hmm.
it. So um I mean, how has the connection to chefs in San Francisco and environs sort of shaped Bernal Cutlery?
Oh, it's been a huge part of, informing what we do, how I understand sharpening. You like we started working with professional with food professionals right away, so chefs and butchers. That was like, within the first couple of months of me doing it professionally. I was starting to, sharpen uh for butchers and for chefs in the neighborhood. And getting their feedback on different finishes was really crucial for me, and kind of getting a bit of an understanding about how edges work, and beyond just how they work when they're freshly sharpened, how well do they
Right.
work as they're dulling, because that's really the bulk of the time that a knife is being used is when it's sharp enough, and what sharp
Right.
enough is really elastic. That'll really depend on, the user's kind of style of working and their preference and sensitivity to resistance, from the cutting edge. um, Definitely getting a chance to see what people were working with, what kind of knives they were using. That was that was instrumental. Being able to introduce things to people, seeing, as soon as I started to be able to source stuff and import directly in 2011, and I was able to get some things into people's hands that, I'd either previously worked on, or, were introduced to, that really kind of helped get like another like kind of feedback happening, where I could understand, people's working styles and people how people are responding to different geometries of blades and such. Um, getting you know 5 different opinions on the same knife can tell me a lot about how different people work, rather than getting 5 different opinions on 5 different knives. That can be kind of helpful. You can learn. I learned from that, but there's a certain point where I kind of need to start zeroing out some of those variables a little bit to get a better sense of it. Um,
Right.
but professionals have definitely like really been crucial for the business. We sharpen and sell to a lot of home cooks and people that aren't in the industry, but definitely people in the industry have always been really important for us, both in terms of advancing our craft, getting better at sharpening and really understanding it, to like kind of honing what we're sourcing, seeing what people are needing, kind of finding some, like, we've seen different kind of trends happen in what people are looking for with the type of knives that people want to work with. Things people are asking for. Some of them endure, some of them don't. So that's also interesting, to kind of get a sense of like, what are some new things that people have started to be curious about, in the last 20 years, that like have really stuck around, and what are some things that just didn't stick, what, like, that don't apply to the actual mechanics of what a professional kitchen is about.
All right, you got my curiosity. Like, can you give us an example of one or two trendy knives or trends in knives that sort of eh?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest one would be single bevel Kuritsuke. So the big wide single bevel knives. It's kind of like a sashimi knife, but extra tall, like the same height
Okay.
um, as a chef's knife, but with a single bevel. So big wide bevel on the outside and concave ground on the inside. So the place where the knife is going up against the food, that inside here would be hollow ground, and then on the outside you'd have the big wide bevel. So that was a thing starting in, like, boy, like maybe uh, 2012, 13. A
Okay.
lot of people are starting to get those, um and then by 2016, 17, they weren't. um and they're just hard to manipulate. They're like
Yeah.
single bevel knives, um Japanese single bevel knives, and that's not a double bevel knife sharpened on one side. That's not just if you take a chef's
No.
knife and just sharpen on one side, like that's still double bevel. But like a true single bevel knife, those um are a bit more single purpose, so they're not like a wide ranging knife, like a chef's knife that you could go from animal to vegetable with. Usually single
Right.
bevel knives have a single purpose. These single bevel knives, being with the general footprint of a chef's knife, you can use it a bit like a chef's knife, but it doesn't drive straight like a chef's knife. It kind of wants to, because the edge is kind of angled a little bit at a curve like this. It wants to kind of duck over to the side a little bit when you're cutting. So if you were to put that blade on the top of an apple and cut forward, you would end up with kind of like 2/3 of an apple coming off, and then so those, that was like a lot of those people were in fine dining. Some of them were doing stuff where they were cutting, um, either cutting sashimi or cutting crudo, working with fish. That knife is good for that kind of stuff. But
Right.
but when it came to like, like doing like a couple quarts of, onions, it's like not happening.
Well, I love the idea that, like, I mean, I know and you know that there's a certain level of maturity is not the right word. There's a certain level of experience required to handle certain knives. And I've always loved trendy things to look at them and go, "Oh, this is gonna go badly." Right?
Yeah.
You get folks who are not necessarily, they're like, "Oh, look at that. That's cool. I love it." I'm left-handed, so the first single bevel knife I ever had was a right-handed knife, and it took me a long time to understand that I was never going to be able to use this quite right. When I got my first left-handed sashimi knife, life like the angels were singing in the
Yeah,
background.
right. Yeah. There's no, it's, you can't bargain with that. That's like, it's either or, and that's it.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it's like, it's cool that people here are open-minded, and cooks want to experiment. And you don't get that everywhere. There's a lot of places that do really, that they do what they do really well, but they're not going to deviate from it at all. And
Right.
like, that food can be, it can be amazing, but it's also like, maybe it's not like really going to be changing as fast or evolving as fast as some other things where people are more experimental, more open minded. Of course, with the experimentation and the open mindedness, you also get some really like messed up things happening, and you get some silly stuff, and you get restaurants with catch up programs and stuff like that. And it's like,
Oh, I love restaurants and restaurant people. Uh, the Blue Angels just flew overhead. There's the usual Seattle Air. What is it? I don't know, Air Week or whatever. So
okay.
we'll see how that goes. Um,
I didn't
because I'm
catch
like,
it on
wait,
my my ancient on my vintage headphones here, but
yeah, it's all good. Um, let's see. What do you feel like is the effect of like the Amazon and knives that are just the mass produced stuff, like heavy duty? Like, do you feel that in your shop? Do you feel like, I mean, tell me, like, is there an effect? I mean, maybe there isn't, but I
it's
gotta wonder.
there's a pro and con. I think as a small business owner, like, there's a lot of things with Amazon and that business model that like aren't really helpful for us on the face of it. Maybe people starting to get a kind of approach to buying stuff where there's no commitment really for them, that if they don't like it, they just get to return it, or and kind of at its worst, maybe encouraging people to lie and be dishonest, and like, this is defective, like this showed up like that. And it's like, no, you hacked it a spare rib, like, or that, like, something like that. But like, so that would be the bad side of it. And then of course there's the like, for some things, it's like a race to the bottom with prices, and that can,
Right.
for people that are dealing there that don't have any overhead, that don't have like a shop where they have employees, or they're trying to hold stock and hold a variety of knives, and have like a staff that is experienced, and that also can sharpen and tell you about like how to best approach, that problem with it, all that kind of stuff. And something like, Amazon dealers that don't have any of those commitments, that can, that are just undercutting you, nickel and dime,
Right.
like, that's kind of galling. On the other hand, like, some of the big brands of knives that come into our sharpening service, and probably everybody could guess what the top five brands are, from Germany and Japan. And I'm not going to badmouth anybody, but any companies or anything like that. But people probably know which ones I'm thinking about. That
Yep.
they come in all day long, and with the Japanese knives, maybe they're not really what they're 100% what they're kind of billed as. They're not handmade. They're not made like samurai swords. There's some things that are kind of a little bit like it's not quite it, not really like understanding the craft or the history of how things are made there or anything like that. But um they do get a Japanese knife into people's hands for the first time they use that knife, a bell goes off, they have a different experience than they ever had before, and that can open the door. And so that can be that 4 or 5 years later, they want to get, more into it, and they come into our shop, or, come to our website or something like that. So in that sense, I'm all for it. And, that kind of just helps broaden people's perspectives, and that's not a bad thing. So,
Right.
I, you know, I I can't really do much about it, So I think for me, like, I I'm kind of done, like, kind of complaining, or you know pissing and moaning about stuff like that. Um, if I have any hurdles with my business, then it's usually best for me to look at how I can do something better, or
Nice.
what's working that I'm doing. And that's far more valuable, and more actionable, ultimately, than, like, what's happening on Amazon or something. That said, if we really do see that there's something that we're selling that, like, we want to invest in, and we want to, like, have a relationship with that maker, because it's nice to have a long-term relationship with makers, and work with people over a long haul. If we see that kind of getting undermined by people, just kind of, like, selling stuff for super cheap on Amazon, then that can be a deal breaker for us with working for somebody, if they're letting that happen. And it's not just because we're,
Right.
like, trying to, like, squeeze every dollar out of, like, what we're selling or anything like that. But, like, reality is, it's hard to have a brick and mortar shop where you're selling things that you have to stock a lot of different knives. It's expensive. It's a big commitment. And then also, it's a commitment with getting to really know a product too, and that takes some time. So for us to be able to best represent it, if we're recommending that to somebody, it's not just because they say, I want something for, $84, and we're like, that's $84. We're like, how are you going to use it? Like, we'll make sure that it's not going to be, you know, the wrong tool for them.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, uh, I there's a lot of what you say that really resonates with me around that topic, because I think within restaurants and food service, you what's what matters is how you care for something. What matters is how you interact with it. So I'm down. Um, what would you say is, like, the biggest misconception that chefs have around their knives? Like, what's the one that where you're just like, hey, what's happening here?
Um, you know, I think, um, I think that it might be, around the geometry of a knife. So how knives work. So there's the edge itself, of course, right? And that, how sharp that is going to, give the knife, its first ability to work, to cut into food. Um, but behind that, there's the geometry of the blade. So how thick is it? And that is going to determine how much it wedges into the food as you're using that knife. So as knives get sharpened repeatedly, they will get wedgier over time. So there's a certain point, if you're only sharpening the edge and you're not removing metal from the sides of the knife, that the knife is going to really slow down a lot, and it's going to get very wedgy and plow like. So there's that phenomenon. So sometimes people will kind of think that uh, an expensive knife is going to last them their whole life, or they might have heard the, like, a good knife lasts your whole life. Buy it right, buy it once, kind of a thing. And if it's a knife that you're using a lot, like, it's kind of like a pair of shoes that you're wearing a lot, you're going to wear them down. They're going to, like, you might be able to get it resoled, get it thinned, but there's a limit. It's both are essentially consumable items. They're getting worn up. So that's one thing I think. Maybe another one is that, when it comes to sharpening, that, I think that people avoid using coarse stones to get the work started when they have a knife that's has a bit more work that's needed. I think sometimes people want to preserve their knife by only using a fine stone on it, thinking that if they
Right.
use a coarser stone, they're going to prematurely use up the knife. So, with the idea of the knife being having a limited life, So they'll only use fine stones, or maybe a medium and a fine stone, but never a coarse stone. And what they might have happen in the progress of sharpening like that is that their edge is kind of a U shape as opposed to a nice crisp V shape. And that U
Okay.
shape, even when it's sharp it's like a pointy U. A pointy U can do things like cut paper or shave hair, that kind of stuff, but it acts a bit more plowy than a sharp V shape. So that V shape is going to feel sharp longer. So if you overwork it, if you spend 20 minutes sharpening one knife, chances are you're going to make a sharp U shape rather than if you spent just a few minutes and keeping your bevel angles nice and clean and keeping a crisp V shape. Of course, if you can't hold a straight angle while you're sharpening, or your technique is such where you're wobbling around or swinging around a lot, then that can get in the way of that as well, and that doesn't really make much of a difference if you can't hold a straight angle. But I think those would be the big misconceptions. There's some, you know it's funny, um sometimes people will really feel that they have to have like the most expensive thing, like that the more expensive something is, the better it is. And that happens up to a certain level where quality
Right.
will raise. But then sometimes, like, you can get to certain levels, and the cost of the knife is not necessarily about its um intrinsic usability or its sharpenability, its ability to hold an edge, anything like that. It can start being around other things, maybe possibly. Some other people, like especially butchers, kind of have the opposite thing going on, where they're like, hey, if I have the skills, then I can use like a hammered bottle cap to get this work done, and there'll be a resistance to using like good quality tools, or like, I'm gonna use $20 knife, like, kind of F you, right? So I get both perspectives, and so, like, nice to meet in the middle, I think, maybe. But of course, skills are crucial, right? Like, and you can't
Yeah.
necessarily just buy skills. Like, you can't, like, buy a new
Nope.
knife and buy extra knife skills with it, right? You just gotta work for that. You gotta pay attention. You gotta be teachable, all that stuff, right? Um, and then, same goes with sharpening too, I suppose, with stones and all that. If you buy really expensive stones, it's not going to make you better. But if you try and do stuff with things that resist you and don't work well, your chances of improving your skills might, be hindered by that. So having tools that don't get in your way is really important.
Yeah. You said two things that just got my, like, the back of my neck just buzzing. Number one is you cannot buy skills. Like, I just envision like somebody putting tokens into a machine and getting
Uh-huh.
credits.
Yeah, yeah.
But the other one that I think has you've probably just changed my life around. I sharpen my own knives, and every once in a while I'll take one or two of them to somebody I trust up here. But the concept of like a sharpened U and something that is plow-like, because never in my life have I ever described like a knife as plow-like, but like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I get what I'm doing wrong. I got it. So I absolutely love that. But the concept of sharp, like having a sharp U versus a sharp V is just dope. Um, and understanding that like you can still cut hair off, and you can still like cut that piece of paper, which is I always feel like when I was younger, that was like your test of like, ooh, that's a
Hmm.
sharp knife. Um, but
Hair and
for
paper
me,
are less delicious generally, though.
yeah, I think for me, uh, the sexy edge on a knife is determined by a big fat woody carrot.
Yeah, for sure, right? Because that has so much resistance in it. It's like, and that'll tell you like what your geometry is like. And there can be times where a knife that isn't going to do well with that carrot would be a good knife for another job. So, if you had uh, a knife that you wanted to, like, smack in between, um, the ribs of a rack of lamb with, you don't want a real thin knife that's going to do great on a carrot for that. that you want something pretty tough, right? So there's times when a different tool is what's needed. But yeah, by and large, I think with knives that are going to be used with vegetables, that big fat carrot is it's
And that's the
that's
test
hard to
for me. It
beat.
has always been the test for me. It's like, okay, I'm done. I've now just spent a good amount of time on my stones, and I'm gonna give it a quick pass of the steel. And there it is.
Yeah,
Okay, back to work.
yeah.
Um, awesome. Let's see. You know, I don't know. I find I talk. I think within the chef world and things, a lot of guys talk about the craft of cooking and the craft of being a chef, and I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on the craft of knife sharpening and just the and kind of how that sort of leans into the craft of using the knife.
Yeah, so I think with like food and obviously food and knives are going to have a lot of parallels, right? I mean, they're riding shotgun with each other, right? But there's obviously some differences, and um, you know, cooking requires a much sometimes a much broader set of knowledge and skills than just doing one task like sharpening, So not to belittle sharpening or anything, but there's parallels and there's things where it's different, I suppose, and with the two of them, there's like a lot of different expectations. Sometimes it's just lunch is lunch, and you just need to get people fed and just do the job, and it's like affordable and reliable is really what's like on demand, and there would be a knife equivalent for that, and there would be a sharpening equivalent for that. And then there's like a different experience. Then there would be an experience that is definitely much more about a lot of different experiences attached to um, getting people fed and getting fed, and and there's different expectations with that might be going into a much kind of more nuanced experience, and something that's drawing on a lot of different parts of the ingredients and the all the things that are coming together to work together. So there's sometimes when we're sharpening, and what's the most important thing with certain types of jobs, and with certain types of knives for certain types of cooks, is just to get those get those things working as well as they can, as quick as they can, at the most reasonable price that we can do it, without cutting corners, without doing it shitty and saying we're the professionals, But the same thing goes for food too, right? And then there's other times when we know that the user is going to be involved with really trying to uh, bring out different textures with the food. They want something that isn't going to get in their way while they're working, that's going to really help them pull out a lot of the essence of the ingredients that they're working with. So something that will cut super cleanly, that's not going to bruise what they're cutting, and that we really need to pay a lot of attention to the geometry of it. Maybe it needs to get thinned. Maybe it needs to, get an overhaul and really get sculpted back to its original geometry. Maybe it's a really fine finish that's needed. So some knives need a coarse finish. They work best without getting a fine polish on the edge. So a lot of softer steels are going to be in that category, and that might be kind of like plate of French fries. It's like you know you can screw up a plate of French fries, but if you overwork those French fries, they're not getting any better after a certain point. Like they're French fries. Like you're just not going to do much past. If you cook them 8 times, they're not any better, right? You're overdoing it. So like some knives are like
Oh,
that. And then others need a lot of work, and they want to be finessed, and they want a fine polish on them.
Nice. I absolutely love how eloquent you were about kind of like the French fry thing is perfect. I just love it because
Maybe somebody has a
it
good way of doing French fries twice. I'm sure, I mean, like I'm not a deep frying guy at home, so I'm sure there's
yeah.
tricks.
I mean, I feel like there's definitely levels of finesse, right? Like you want to have a certain level of finesse to make good French fries, but that isn't like employing the seventh level of finesse isn't necessarily going to get you home. And I understand what you're saying. Like you can overwork that same thing.
Yeah, yeah. If you
Josh,
cut
thank you
it,
for coming to play with us, man. I really
yeah. Thanks for
appreciate
having me.
it.
It's fun.
I call this my little sandbox in the world, culinary mechanic, and getting to talk to somebody who really is as focused and as passionate about something that I use every day and love to use is pretty exciting to me. So
uh, I
I totally dig it.
I appreciate it. It's always been really important for me to kind of get to chat with people that are more in the trenches and spending a lot of time with their knives and with their tools and really getting down with that. It's something that I really only get to dip my toe in, like in terms of the duration that I you know use the knives that I'm working with personally. So being able to get the experience and just to hear the questions like that come to mind from a chef is really crucial. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing your thoughts with me too.
Awesome, man. In the show notes, I'm going to make sure that we can find you
Okay,
online. Make sure that it is accessible so that anybody who's interested in checking you out can do so.
cool. Thanks.
Um, Once again, thank you so much for coming to play. To all you out there, we're going to catch you next time. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thanks, Simon.
You've been listening to Culinary Mechanic. This show exists to help you lead with more clarity, build systems that actually work, and create a kitchen culture worth showing up for. If this episode helped you move even one step in that direction, do me a favor, leave a quick review. It helps more chefs and operators stop the chaos and start leading with intention.